Hello friends, welcome back to our final session today. I'm switching to English because our next guest joins us from the USA. And I will start my very short introduction with a quote. The most successful companies of the coming decades will be those who are most agile and are able to react fast. In order to succeed, companies must reduce hierarchies and bureaucracy and empower employees to make faster decisions. That's a quote by Stuart Butterfield, quoted in Handelsblatt here in Germany last year. Stuart Butterfield is the founder of Slack, and if you do not know, in the very unlikely case, what Slack is, it's a channel-based instant messaging system, a tool for agile, borderless communication between teams in corporate environments. And of course, Slack is a company. Founded in 2009 in Vancouver, employs today over 2,000 employees, and of course has been acquired by Salesforce recently for $27.7 billion. We are made for one another, said Salesforce founder Mark Benioff. And just in time last year, they hired a new Chief People Officer, Nadia Rawlinson. In times of uncertainty, Nadia says a strong integrative corporate culture is key. How Slack maintains and develops an agile corporate culture while dealing with the pandemic and the Salesforce integration at once. Jochen, Wegner, editor-in-chief of ZEIT Online, discusses now with Nadia. Thanks for joining us, and over to you, Jochen. Enjoy.
Thank you, Mark. Great haircut, by the way. So I welcome Nadia Rawlinson again. She's, as Mark mentioned, Chief People Officer at Slack. So something like HR person, C-level HR. But also, I think, I assume responsible for rethinking Slack's very own workplace, which is interesting because we all rethink how we work these days. And Slack is at the core of organizing the new world we are drifting into. Nadia worked in leading positions for Live Nation Entertainment, Rakuten, Groupon, American Express, Rent a Runway, and Google. She also BA from Stanford and an MBA from Harvard. So I'm really impressed and I'm very happy that you're here. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And first thing we have to make clear, this is not a virtual background you're
No, it's real.
You just show me it's a real house and it's your private home. So congrats to that. And you started at Slack 5 months ago. So during the pandemic. And how often did you meet your CEO, your team, and all these people as the HR person at Slack?
Right. So interestingly enough, I haven't met anyone in person in real life, as they say online, IRL. But I did go through a very extensive interview process. Just because we're in a pandemic and working in a distributed way does not mean that you did not have multiple interviews via Zoom, conversations on weekends and evenings just to get to know each other. And I think if anything, there was a greater intentionality and spending some time that we can build the relationships over time. So haven't met anyone in person yet, though. My team, Stuart, my fellow execs, no one, other than the couple of people I knew already who were friends of mine who currently work at Slack.
So from time to time, I have to hire a few people, and I had the golden rule before the pandemic that I always wanted to meet in person once at least. I don't know if this is really old-fashioned. How was your worldview as a HR pro before the pandemic? So did you hire a lot of people without ever meeting them in person?
Oh, that was actually the predicate. That was the first thing to really check your gut instincts and the process to ensure that this was the right person for the role. There was an assumption, these articles of faith that you couldn't make a full assessment if you didn't have a face-to-face conversation, if not once or more. I even had a narrative in my head. I made one bad hiring mistake in my career, and I said it was my leader for my APAC region, and I did not spend some time meeting them in person, flying overseas to have that conversation. But the reality is that I also have made a couple of mistakes when I have met people before. So that wasn't necessarily the blocker. And I've also made some really great hires that I haven't met. And this has been proven time and time again through the pandemic. So I think that the pandemic and this new world that we're working in has challenged all of these, sacred cows, these things that we never thought could be unbroken or changed. I think with this, with the pandemic, it's challenged all of us to rethink how we look at the world and how we work and the different decisions and how we make those decisions.
How many people did your team hire since you started there remotely?
Yeah, so we went fully remote in March 2020, and clearly it's been a year now, and slightly more than 20% of our entire workforce was hired during this pandemic. So we have 2,500 people, and so 20% of those, most of us have never met, so including myself.
I assume that, so if there's one company that should have been prepared for a global pandemic, it's Slack, right? Because as an outsider, you have the feeling, so everyone's at home all the time, nobody's in the office. I don't think that is really true. I think you mentioned in an interview with the FT, so I still remember that only some tiny percent of the people were outside. So they were all in the Slack HQ. Why that? And why that? Because Slack is the remote company, in my mind at least. Why do you think a physical presence was so important for Slack in the first place? And can you describe how you work today? Because that's super interesting for all of us who are at home most of the time, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, why we were more office-based is the same reason why every company has an HQ and is office-based. Again, there's these automatic assumptions that we have to be in the office together and working in this, very traditional way, that you're at your desks and workstations and you have your teams around you. We were having debates just a year ago of, can you really count on productivity if you don't see the person in front of you, right? And even though we are a platform that enables distributed work, and I think in a way we were built for this moment, but that was not the starting point for the reason for us building Slack. We were similar to other companies. I think HQs are sort of standard practice for corporate headquarters, especially part of the culture in Silicon Valley and technology in San Francisco area. It's like, do you have the building with your logo on it? There's a little bit of ego in that too, if we're honest, and sort of you're projecting your strength and your prominence in the space, where you're located, location from a real estate strategy matters. All of those things were coming into play, and people assumed in this traditional way of working that you left home to go to work. And so we were no different than other companies. Now, I will say that the product and the platform of Slack itself, as I said, has turned out to be built for this moment. Similar to Zoom, I'm sure Zoom didn't say we're going to be built for a remote world, but it happens to have met the moment. I will say that it's not just the product, because technology is, you do this for a living and interview many people within technology, is just a means to an end. It's not a solve. I think you have to think about culture and how culture is imbued throughout the organization in order to leverage things like Slack and use it to its best of its ability and to the potential of what it can bring. And I think the culture at Slack has been built to be one where we had already very sort of democratized decision-making, very public discourse through Slack in the channels. There was this bottoms-up sort of autonomy and emphasis for employees to use their voice and talk, and anyone can jump into conversations. Information was already archived in channels in the platform. So if you wanted to find it, you could. Doesn't matter who you were. It wasn't private. If you weren't an executive, doesn't mean you couldn't see what our metrics and dashboards were. You can. So all of that was already part of who we were and how we operated. And we made decisions collectively, but in public. So there wasn't anything, behind closed doors or in secret rooms. So as we moved to a distributed work environment, that actually not only was a great basis to start from, but it just amplified the ability to be even more productive and collaborative once we were not in the office together.
Can you describe your daily life for mortals like me? So How is your working day now in this beautiful environment, by the way?
Oh, yes. And as I was telling Jochen before, this is my husband's man cave, which is, I don't know if it's a very American thing, but this is where he goes to read books, smoke cigars, and with the dogs and his family. So, and the fireplace and, think and, do all of those things that men like to do with their other friends. So in my daily life, actually, I don't think it's that much different from yours or others. It is a wall of meetings, unfortunately, on Zoom, but also constant work through Slack. I don't actually check email. I've made a practice of checking at least once a week so I don't miss anything.
Once, can we repeat that again? Once you check your email once a week, right? Once
a week. And because, so this is why, and this isn't just a flippant statement, I didn't use Slack before I came to work at Slack. So I am a complete convert. I didn't understand it. I didn't really get it. I thought it was just the app on my phone, and this is what I use for my my social life and sort of like the running club I'm in, and we sort of correspond over Slack, just to coordinate when we're going to get together. The reality is it's a completely immersive environment, and so we are the best use case of Slack on Slack one can imagine of how it can be effective in organizations. So you come here and everything that you need is within the platform. There's one-to-one communication, so you and I could just have our normal chats. There's channel-based communication based on projects or teams. Case in point, for my team, the People and Places team, I have a channel just for my entire function, so I can communicate seamlessly with all 200 plus people. They can with me. Have one for just for my leadership team, so we can communicate as we need to. I have channels that are just for agendas, so if we want to park items, instead of saying, oh, I need to remember to do that, shoot you an email, let's just put it in our agenda channel and we'll go back to it when we have our one-on-ones. And then even from a cultural standpoint, there's channels that identify those cultural tenets and attributes of what it means to be at Slack and how does it feel. So I was just joking earlier, I have 2 cockapoos, and there's a doodles channel. So everyone in the company around the world,
so they are dogs, right?
They're dogs. Yes. But that's part of your day, and people are posting the funny things their dogs have done, or when, even though we're socially distant, you can have a dog, meet up and play time, and there's video, and it's just a levity to your day that it adds around the culture. And you can see all of that through Slack and channels. So my point is throughout meetings, there's normal meetings that everyone has. I'm also corresponding with people, teams, individuals, people I know, people I don't know, meaning that I don't work with every day, but they have similar affinity as I do, like dogs, and can have fun and interesting conversations while you're getting your work done. But my days are pretty packed, so from morning until evening.
So there are many positive things happened when we moved to our home offices and worked remotely, obviously. And I think you mentioned once that you also think that it was kind of liberating for a lot of people who are underrepresented, for example. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
It's so interesting. So I love that you did your research and we're looking at part of, you wouldn't be good at your job if you didn't. So I appreciate that. So what I was referencing is that Slack has a think tank called Future Forum, where we are putting together sort of an organization that partners with all the best companies out there, big and small, public, private, et cetera, around the best practices in the future of work. And so we think that we have a sort of a unique position to help drive that conversation and fund a lot of research with corporate partners, et cetera, to do so. We did the most comprehensive survey that's out there around knowledge workers at the beginning of the pandemic, and we are releasing our new results coming up as a follow-on to that. But one of the attributes that we looked at was, how does inclusion and belonging work in a distributed work environment? If our baseline understanding is belonging and including is heavily based on being together physically, how is that impacted in this new world? And what we found is that in the US, because that's where we collect ethnic and racial data, African Americans and Hispanics and Asians felt far greater sense of belonging and inclusion than their non-minority counterparts at work in this new distributed work environment. Now, why does that matter? A couple of things. One, I think there's been very little new research on diversity and inclusion, this sort of a wash, rinse, repeat of sort of old tropes of what's been happening in corporate America, and there's nothing that's really new. Two, there would be a natural assumption and hypothesis that in this world, things would deteriorate around inclusion because we're not physically together, when in fact, what we found is for the groups that are most impacted around inclusion and belonging, actually felt a greater sense of inclusion. So from there, you have to understand, like, why is that? So I can use my, the intellectual side of me to sort of do that work. But I also, as a African-American woman in corporate, have my own personal experience with it. And what we're teasing out, and so one of the suppositions that we have is, you can be your full self. You don't have to put on your professional mask to fit in and to be alike everyone else that's at the company. I think with this pandemic, with the Zoom here, you're seeing my home. This is literally where I live every day. When you see the dogs come in or you hear the cars go by, that's my life. How many times have you had the opportunity to spend time in your coworkers' homes, let alone those that are very different from you? I know in my own experience, I, had very few times, it depends on the culture of the company, but rarely did I have my coworkers at my house. And I can imagine for my white coworkers, how often have they been to a Black person's house? So the fact that you're seeing this, it's like, oh, she also has a couch. Oh, she also has a dog, or
the man cave.
I see the bookshelf. She reads the same things as I do, or something different. It's just this more authentic connection that you have with people that I think allows for that greater belonging. So you see people in a multidimensional way. The other thing I would say is when we're all in Zoom or we're all, whatever your video conferencing sort of platform of choice is, we're all equal. We're all 2x3 squares on a screen, and you see just this much of me. I'm not, thinking about, where your office is located versus, relative to the CEO. Was I invited down to coffee at 3 p.m. to go down in Spear Street with a group of people? And if I was included in that, or did they forget, or they just didn't invite me? Conversations that may be serendipitous in an elevator, but because you're on the same floor, you get to have more of those than I would because I'm located somewhere else. Or even just for me, I live in a different place. I don't live in San Francisco, and I'm not moving to San Francisco, even if things sort of open up again. I'm an executive there, and I don't have to be what it would have been in the old world of I'm the face on the screen while everyone else is in the room. So there's natural inequities and unequal access or just unequal opportunities for these conversations and relationships to be developed. And I think in the physical world, that gets obviated in the digital world here. So that's my supposition. That's what I think. It's definitely been true for me.
How is leadership changing I know this is a big question, but how is leadership changing in this new world? What do you tell your leaders in the company? How should we behave?
I would love your thoughts too, because you have a great, you in your position, you see and talk to a lot of leaders in different industries. So it would be interesting to see your thoughts on that and what you've observed. For me, and particularly at Slack and in my previous company, because I was in both during this pandemic, I would say leadership has changed to become, let me just say this, there's a greater obligation to be vulnerable.
Right.
Lean into emotional sort of awareness versus just focusing on IQ. There's a lot of EQ that needs to be exercised. A greater expectation for authenticity and access to you as a leader. At this time is hard for everyone. I don't think any one person has enough, or any one organization has enough to give what everybody actually needs. We're over-indexed in stress and tension and navigating a new world. There's just a lot that's happening that we have to balance that we've never done before. This is our first pandemic, right? There's no rubric here that we're using. And so with that that actually necessitates us as leaders, instead of going in the direction that may be natural, which is be the leader that's on the pedestal, declare things from on high. I have all the answers. I can do this. I'm going to put on my superhero cape and save the company around what we need to do to get through this. It's actually the opposite. You need to sit back, listen, meet people where they are, understand their situation, use a more one-to-one direct in interaction with your team, and show more of yourself. And again, I think being on Zoom helps because you're seeing people in their natural environment. Usually I dressed up today for you. Usually I would be in probably a sweatshirt or, some casual clothes that I would never, ever wear to the office. And to see your boss sort of show up the way that you would in your everyday, they're just like us. There is that natural connection when you force the vulnerability, the connection, and the emotional sort of awareness that creates trust, more trust on your team. It's a little counterintuitive. They're like, oh, they have the courage to be them. I can see how it's not perfect. I can see where we can sit down and say, you know what, I don't know what the right answer is. Let's think through this. Like, what could it be? These are things I'm considering. What are you considering? Can actually help with building the resilience and the safety and trust for the teams to be even better as we move through this. So I think that's how leadership has changed, and it'll be interesting to see what management theory comes up with on the back end of this to assess how leaders have shown up. But it's definitely different than what it was before.
So we're mainly talking about upsides. You mentioned some downsides already, but there's one major downside, which is a lot of discussions if the pandemic is setting women's careers back, right? Do you have the feeling, for example, at Slack, that there's a problem now?
I actually was hypersensitive to this. So again, I bring some of my personal self to work, being a woman who is a professional, who has a full-time job with a lot of responsibility. I don't have children, but almost everyone who is married on my team or not even has children. And some are in dual income households, some are doing it on their own. So there's a variety of experiences. So I'm hypersensitive to it in my role in particular. And so I got the research, got the data, looked at the results. Do we have folks that are treating at a higher rate? So women, especially those with families, are treating at a higher rate, or are they asking or using our benefit programs in an outsized way from their male counterparts? And none of that happened to be true at Slack. Now, that being said, that's Slack. That does not, we should not be the arbiter for every company. We are in a unique position. We have, like I said, knowledge workers. We don't have frontline essential workers. We tend to have a very highly educated workforce, very highly compensated on average for the type of workforce we have. And we actually have more primary caregivers who are men than women at the company, which was also something that was really interesting. And I think that's partly generational. This is my own hypothesis around it. We have younger workers. And so that wasn't something we saw at my company. However, talking to my peers, other chief people officers and chief human resources officers at public companies, and especially with a varied workforce and global workforce, that is something that's an issue. Because again, this goes back to culture, policy, and behaviors. And there are companies that are not built for over-indexing in flexibility. Again, going back to this empathetic leadership, how are you meeting your people to give them what they need right now? One size does not fit all. What are your programs that you're offering or policies that you put in place so it's institutionalized? It's not something that's based just on the individual who happens to be the loudest voice who gets the exception to the rule. You need to really think through how you're supporting your employees, especially women in this time period, and minorities and those that are typically marginalized, because these things are hitting people in different ways. Also, again, you just have to think through every segment of your population. There's no more, we're managing to the whole. You have to play to the long tail and think through what are those policies and culture practices that you have that can support those in your organization, especially women.
There used to be, even before the pandemic, all these books and stories about email mainly making us miserable. And it started to become bigger and bigger during the pandemic. And there's this Zoom fatigue now. And there's also, I assume, at least in our company, we're using Slack with, I think, something like 900 people. There's a kind of Slack fatigue. And I remember the Atlantic wrote that Slack transformed our workplace into a dystopian micro Twitterverse. So can you share some deep insights from Slack? So is there a best practice how not to become crazy, how not to, burn out in this super intense environment?
And so again, I would like to think that Slack is, becoming the evil empire for taking up all of your time and space and mental capacity.
Destroying my life.
Right. They probably said that about the telephone and then TV, and then, you could keep going in history. And it just comes down to a couple of things. One, self-management, and two, utilizing some of the things we built within Slack to your advantage. So I'll start with the latter and then go to the former. So with Slack, we have notification setups, and you can decide when and how, if at all, you want to be notified if you get a message or communication. It's a little bit like text messages. I know a lot of parents now are complaining that their kids, like, all you hear is the ping of the text. And so it's like Pavlov's dog. They're like, oh, I have to go and get on my phone and text. You can turn off notifications. You can manage notifications in a way that it suits you.
Is the Slack account of Stuart Butterfield ever kind of...
Yes.
Does he ever kind of...
Yes.
Is he
Absolutely.
awake?
Yes,
Actually,
absolutely.
ever?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Okay. So again, this goes back to culture. You just can't rely on the tool itself. We have a culture where status updates matter. And so it has my name right now, will probably say Nadia Rawlinson, and it has a little emoji. We're very big emoji culture, which we respect. And it has a little calendar icon emoji, and then it says in an interview meeting. Right. So they know that this is live, that I actually cannot multitask during this meeting, and they'll respect that, and they'll respond to me when that status update goes away, or I'm on PTO, which is paid time off or vacation or holiday, or I'm walking the dog, or I am, doing, Zoom school for kids, be right back, BRB, things like that. And then you also can set your actual notification button to say, my working hours are from this time to this time, or this time to this time. And it will inform people when they direct message you that Nadia, because I'm on the East Coast now, and even though I'm working West Coast hours, it's 11 p.m. for Nadia in her time zone. Do you still want to send this message? Yes or no? And then you can decide if that message interrupts my non-working time, because I've set that status for my profile. So not only do you manage yourself around what types of notifications that you get, when and where, but also it helps inform other people. So it's a checks and balances on their side of, do you want to overstep the boundaries that she's already set? Stuart is great at that too. On the weekends, at certain times of night, you'll see there's the ZZZ, like he is offline and sleeping. All the executives do that. So I know that this is when he's probably not going to respond immediately or until tomorrow, whenever he's online again. And that promotes what we call asynchronous work. And so it doesn't have to happen right when we're working the same hours at the same time. I know that when their status updates are open up, that they'll be able to get back to me. So I think those are the tools that are built in. I do also think in this world that there's burnout. And this is where the self-management comes in. The work isn't going to regulate itself. People will interact with you, use you, send you things, demand things of you, as long as you let it happen. So there needs to be some self-discipline around the times you take breaks, the times for the culture you have in your organization. For my team, I've said, it's okay if you don't want the camera on, just put it in chat. And so we're, again, very explicit. Hey, I'm eating lunch, so I'm going to be off camera. And so they'll just be on. Or I'm going to the doctor's office, I'm in the car, so I'm just dialing in versus over video. So you can get rid of that Zoom fatigue. Do walking meetings. I have that set up in my calendar, so I'm not always on Zoom. I can get some exercise or just get your brain working, because there's studies that show you're more thoughtful and productive when you do walking meetings. Do something like that. And quite honestly, actually unplug when you're unplugged. And so no matter how intense the work gets for me, and I do work asynchronously, so I take like probably from 2 to 3, 4 in the middle of the afternoon for me, I take a break, which is around lunchtime on the West Coast, but then I dial back in and sort of go up for Slack and work a little bit later at night. That you actually do unplug, that you stop what you're doing and you focus your attention elsewhere. These things around mental health is a real issue. This has been trying for everyone in different ways. I think there's been a collapse between the personal and professional, and so those natural boundaries don't exist anymore. And we don't have all the social systems and structures we have in place, from childcare to going to the grocery store just to have a break without a mask, being able to be around loved ones and having that natural connection has all been interrupted. And so that actually takes a toll on humans. And so there's a larger need and expectation that we create some of those boundaries and take those moments for ourselves so we can recharge outside of any tool, whether it be Slack or otherwise.
Okay, cool. Thank you. There's another problem I realized in our teams. So in the first wave of the pandemic, I saw like everyone was fine, I think, and people became even more happy. So what you saw in the German statistics, at least, that there was this kind of nice holiday feeling around, and now it's totally different. And one of the things I realized, it's really hard to have this feeling for a larger group of people if you're working together. So when you're working from somewhere else, how do you reestablish the sense of community in a remote world? So do you have any tips for us?
I do. And I think this is where leadership and companies have to evolve and create new norms and habits, or double down on some of the things you've done before but didn't really pay attention to. And for that, that is, again, intentionality. So you have to make the implicit behaviors and choices explicit. So for creating community, that's instead of saying, hey, part of my community is that I sit next to someone and we talk about our dogs because I could see the pictures on their desks that they all have the same dogs. How do you create that moment, but in a more explicit way, to still have that connection with people who are like you, who like the same things as you, or who are intellectually interesting, or just have a support network in a different way? So for us, again, we go back through our channels. We have a Slack culture channel, so things that are unique to Slack, and Slacky is what we call them. We talk about it and engage in it through our culture channel. Different things and clubs that you would normally find in offices, we now have within our Slack channel. So one that's a favorite of mine is fresh kicks. So I'm a little bit of a novice sneakerhead, and anytime there's a new sneaker drop somewhere around the world and the new hot kicks, people talk about it and say what their process was for finding it and how they went through different rabbit holes to get it. So that's a fun community-driven experience for people who like the same things I do. I think that's what's important that you have to do in companies, is what are those spaces where people can really gather and then have conversation and connection on things that unite them. So things that would be implicit that you do naturally through just being in the same space, you have to do more explicitly in this environment. And then just even from personal things. So again, coming out of work, just still being intentional about connecting with those family and friends, or the people that give you energy. Or the places or those activities. This time may make it harder, but it's that much more important to find those points of connection. And then they often pay off in a better way because we're in such a sort of an unusual time.
How can you make sure that your employees, your colleagues are really doing well? So if you enter a room in a real headquarter, you immediately, most of the time, see how people are doing. It's you to see how they move, how they behave, whatever. And this is all stripped away now. So is there something special you're trying to do to check in to people to see if they are okay?
Yes. And, this goes back to my point around empathetic leadership and vulnerability and authenticity, and how that's a new norm in this new time. And especially in the U.S., with the most recent, I should say last summer, with the death of George Floyd and the ensuing social unrest And it really impacted everyone, even outside of the Black community, but in particular within the Black community. And this was a reckoning for the world, I think, around how people are experiencing their daily lives differently from one another. And they bring that to work. Those things don't stay in a pocket. And this is where those walls are broken down between the professional and the personal. And so you do have to check in with people. You do have to have a better way of being attuned to those around you. And so for us at Slack, we've given our leaders support guides, resources. This is how you show up. These are the things you can say. This is how you can educate yourself, not just on the social moments that are going on right now, but also on how to think about leadership in a different way, because you can't just tell people to go do it. You also need to sort of lead them to the places where they can learn to be different and better. And so we talk about that. And if they want to take personal action to do that, like if you want to learn more about mental health resources and get involved yourself, or learn about your own meditation practice that may help balance some of this unrest that you may feel. And then in checking in with people with how do you start your meetings? That's something, a personal practice I've done, is before I do my leadership team meetings, we meet once a week. We meet a lot more than that, but formally once a week. I start with, we always do like an icebreaker. It's not really nice since we all know each other. And I say, give me 2 words of how you're feeling right now. 2 adjectives. I'm feeling overwhelmed, yet optimistic. Great. Jochen, what do you think? Oh, I feel happy, but anxious. Or, so you see where people are, and it breaks it out of, I'm on a train just trying to get work done and execute, but you're actually stopping for a moment, acknowledging what's going on. And sometimes, and often for us, it's not even what's going on at work. It's also what's going on personally that is creeping into how they're showing up every day. And just that acknowledgement helps build better trust between people.
Will Slack return to its headquarters again?
We will still have our headquarters, but it'll be used in a different way. So we've announced last summer that, we are allowing our employees to work from anywhere if they choose, just to let us know, so we know where they are and know how to support them best. But we will keep our headquarters at 500 Howard in San Francisco with the name on the building. Stuart said this on your last conversation. He said offices,
you
though.
did your research?
Yes. And so Stuart said that offices will be used in a different way. It is an unbundling of how offices have been used in the past to what they are today. We won't be going back to all teams coming in at the same time for the sole purpose of being in the office to work 5 days a week. Our Future Forum research tells us that 80% of knowledge workers prefer to have some hybrid work environment and going into the office 1 to 2 days a week at most to collaborate, see people, connect with people, work on a particular project in a sprint, and then go home. Or go back to where they are. They like not having their long commutes. For people maybe who are not in a place where they have a family or partner, they're single and they've been in their house, a 1-bedroom apartment or studio for months now. And so the office may play a different role than just for work. It's more for connection and community, but it doesn't have to be every day. People have valued this autonomy and flexibility. But the flexibility isn't just you're working from home, so you're lifting and shifting from the office to home, but giving people the tools and the wherewithal to work in ways that work best for them. And that's what has to be the lead, and that's what Slack is doing. And the office will just support that, not be the lead.
We are currently looking for a building for the ZEIT in Berlin for the time after the pandemic. The problem is, so the Berlin market is terrible. It's getting better now, but the major problem is we don't know what we are looking for. Because we don't know how in the future our spaces will look like. So can you tell me how you are rethinking the work, so the physical workspaces at Slack?
So again, we're, as you mentioned at the top, and Mark did when he introduced us, we are going to be merging with Salesforce, which is very exciting.
It's an additional,
Yes, and they have 60,000 employees in far more places around the world than we do. So our strategies are aligning with theirs, so we can make sure it is an amplification of it. But notionally, how we're thinking about it is, what are the ways that people work? How do we think about productivity, right? Let's look at working groups themselves and not just have one answer for everyone. Our sales teams this may be a space where you bring clients and it's more of an executive briefing center, and we sort of reconfigure the floors to be something that feels more conducive to a mini conference than it was in the past. We already were pretty sort of open space, open work, and everyone can work across floors, but doing more of that, having spaces where it's more about groups of people coming together versus me having a singular heads down desk. We're not thinking about this as Nadia needs to go into the office and open her laptop at her singular workstation that she goes to every day. Those days are no longer going to be true. You have to think about where you can get those things that really augment the work from home or the distributed work but benefiting from some of the ways that office space can be used differently. I think it also depends with how the pandemic goes. Vaccines and policy around that is a hot topic as well, I'm sure, in organizations. And so do we still need a social distance? How do we think about technology to measure the temperature within rooms? How can we see how many people are using a conference room without bringing too many people together? How do we think about capacity management in buildings? I'm sure it's not going to be everyone's there. We're 2,000 people all within the same square footage. It will be some derivative thereof, and that's okay. I think that's actually the future of where we're going, and reusing real estate in a completely different way.
Okay. So since I'm really old, I did quite some interviews with Stuart already in different phases of his life. And I asked him some years ago, I think 5 or 7 years ago, whatever. I remember when he just got started with Slack, and Slack became super popular. He got a lot of investments. He had no incentive to sell ever. Yeah. What changed?
That would be a great question for him.
I know it's not your business.
I wish he was here, because he has, I mean.
But it was a surprise for you too. So you were joining Slack just some weeks, I would assume, before the deal. How is that for an HR person to have a new mission? And you joined as a super high potential person, one team, and then they told you, oh, you're a part of another team now. How was that?
So I think I'm uniquely built for the moment, and this is sort of what I do. If we've talked about sort of my background before we got on the call today, that I've done a lot across many different types of organizations that's had a lot of change, and organizations that have gone through many inflection points, public to private, scaling from small to mid-size, going from US to international, vice versa, divestitures, et cetera, and being internationally focused, but then trying to build in the North American space. So I've gone through change, and I think this is the type of thing that I'm great at. And so managing through that was not hard. It was a surprise, though. I did not know that we were going to have a transaction with Salesforce before I started. But I don't necessarily think that would have changed my decision, because I joined for the promise of what the product can do for me as a HR executive, and where I want to be put to my best and highest use as a professional, of making my imprint on the world. And having a product and platform like Slack and a business model and a reason for being tied to reimagining the future of work is a match that's perfect for me. And so that doesn't necessarily change with the acquisition. So for me, there's just even more engagement of how I can help bring that to life.
Nadia, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for showing us this really impressive room. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts. And I hope to see you again soon. Yes. Maybe in person in Berlin.
Maybe I'll come your way or you'll come our way. So that'd be wonderful.
Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day. Bye-bye.